by the grace of God and through his gift to me, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am tonight a very grateful recovering alcoholic, and my name is Alexis. Hi, everybody. There was a fellow who lived in the backwoods of Mississippi, and his dream was to one day become a preacher. And so he left the backwoods of Mississippi and went to the big city, Jackson. And there he became a preacher. And he came back to the woods of Mississippi, to a little church, to preach to the people. But like so many of us, he forgot his origins. And he wasn't there but a very short time when the people complained. Said, Brother John, we don't understand you. You keep using those $2 words. He said, well, when you don't understand what I'm saying, he said, you ask me and I will explain it to you. Well, the next Sunday, he made the observation, he said, it will be a phenomenon if any of you people get to heaven. One of the fellows raised his hand. He said, there is an example. What is a phenomenon? And Brother John said, no. He said, if you were walking down the road and you saw a little white picket fence, that would not be a phenomenon. He said, if you saw a cow grazing in the field, that would not be a phenomenon. He said, if you saw a thistle growing by the fence, that would not be a phenomenon. He said, if you saw a little bird sitting on that fence and singing, that would not be a phenomenon. But he said, if you saw that cow sitting on that thistle singing like a bird, that would be a phenomenon. So what I'm saying to you this evening is what you got here is a phenomenon. I am an alcoholic, but I don't drink. Thanks be to God and to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, there was a woman who went to see her parish priest about her husband's drinking. Sound familiar, huh? And she told him about it and asked him if he would go and speak to her husband. And he agreed to do that. But he was nowhere near ready, you know. So he wasn't listening to Father at all. Father laid the message on him, but he made no progress at all. About a week later, Father was in town, and he saw this guy coming towards him, you know, weaving from side to side. Nothing attracts a drunk like a Roman collar. You know? And he came up to him, and he said, Father, I want to ask you a question. Father said to him, what is it? He said, what causes shingles? And the priest thought, oh, now I'll get him. Shingles, he said, I'll tell you what causes shingles. Drinking causes shingles. Drinking and sexual excesses, making a general nuisance of yourself, that is what causes shingles. He said, why do you ask? He said, I just read the Pope's got the shingles. There was a fellow who didn't go to church too often, but he made it one Christmas. And when the service was over, the Reverend was standing outside bidding everyone adieu. And this guy said to him, Reverend, he said, that was a damn good sermon. Yes, sir, damn good. Damn good. And the Reverend said, I appreciate your enthusiasm, thank you. Yes, sir, he said, damn good. So damn good. He said, just great. Best damn sermon I heard in years. The Reverend said, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but he said, your language leaves a little bit to be desired. Well, he said it was. He said it was the best damn sermon I've ever heard. He said it was so damn good, I put $100 in the collection. The preacher stepped back and he said, the hell you did. The meal that we had here this evening was certainly outstanding, and the service was great. You know, usually at banquets of this nature, they serve you a chicken. One time at one of these banquets, they were serving Cornish hen. And the waiters were trying to get it on the table as quickly as possible, and this woman called the waiter over. She said, "This hen only has one leg." He looked at it, he said, "What the hell are you going to do, eat it or dance with it?" We didn't have that problem tonight. You know, I'm getting better. You know how I know I'm getting better? You don't look like a posse anymore. Don't tell me this program doesn't work. When I came in here tonight, they tried to put me into the wedding group. One time, a priest friend of mine, myself, we were at a group anniversary, and it was the custom of that group to invite the pastor to come down and to address the group. He was obviously very nervous, the pastor was. He didn't know what to expect. And he spotted Gregory and myself. And he made a beeline over to us. And he said, "Oh," he said, "it is so good of you to come out tonight in support of these good people." Gregory said, "The hell you say? We're one of them." You know, one of the things I have found out is how pointless it is to be nervous when you're going to speak at an AA meeting. Almost from the time I came into the program, my sponsor, Father John, said to me, "Don't worry about it," he said. "You just get up and you do the best you can." He said, "When you are finished, some in that group will rise up, renewed in their commitment to sobriety. Others," he said, "will simply wake up, refreshed." From my own experience, I found out that being concerned about speaking at an AA meeting is just a waste of time. The most affirming people on the face of God's earth are the people in AA. When did you go to a meeting last and the secretary said, "We got 2 lousy speakers for you tonight"? Or even 1 lousy speaker and 1 good speaker. No, everybody in AA is a great speaker, great speaker. It's like these 2 fellows who roamed through the cemetery one day, reading all of the stones, you know, the epitaphs. Loving husband, you know, a giant among men, woman of the year, all these nice things. He said, makes you wonder where the hell they bury the sinners. And introductions, the introductions you get in AA. I had a lovely introduction tonight. But I'm reminded of the fellow who on Judgment Day came forth from the tomb. Gabriel sounded his horn and he came out. And as he did, he glanced around to see what it said on the stone. And on the stone it said, "Loving son, faithful husband, devoted father." "Damn," he said, "I've been laying in the wrong hole." I came all the way over here to Baltimore from Silver Spring, you know, and I figured I'm not going to meet anybody here who's heard me before, so I can tell my story. Half my friends from Washington are over here. So for them and for those of you who have heard me before, I'm reminded of a story. When Moses went up on the mountain to get the commandments from God, and finally when he came down, he said to the Israelites, "Friends," he said, "I got some good news for you and I got some bad news for you. The good news is," he said, "remember those 31 commandments? We got them down to 10. The bad news is the 2 about sex are still in there." So to those of you who have heard me before, I got some good news for you and I got some bad news for you. The good news is my story hasn't changed. The bad news is I'm going to tell it to you all over again. And tonight I got the time. There was an itinerant preacher who moved through the Southland. He'd arrive in a town on Monday morning and he'd start hanging up signs. Saturday night, a revival. Come one, come all. And he arrived in this little town on a Monday morning and he started his little procedure, hanging up his signs, putting up his tent. Came Saturday night. There was only one guy in the tent, one farmer. And the preacher came in and he said, well, I guess we'll call it off. The farmer said, well, Reverend, he said, I ain't one for advising the clergy. But he said, if I went down to the pasture and there was only one cow there, he said, I would feed that one cow. And the preacher said, brother, you are right. And so he proceeded to lay the message on him. 2.5 hours. Genesis through Revelations. When he was finished in a big sweat, he fell into his chair and he said, well, brother, he said, what do you think about that? Well, he said, Reverend, like I say, I ain't one for advising the clergy. But he said, if I went down to the field, he said, there was only one cow there. He said, I wouldn't feed him the whole damn carload. So tonight, with all the time I have, I may feed you the whole damn carload. There are, in my judgment, many purposes for AA meetings. 2 are most important for me. The one is to celebrate what, with God's help, we have become. And that's what we're doing, I think, tonight. We're celebrating. And we're acknowledging that what we have is a gift from God. I believe sobriety is a gift that God gives to us. After we have done what we can do. God will not do for us what we can do for ourselves. God has never taken me to a meeting. He's never called my sponsor, and he's never worked the steps for me. If we do those things, then God gives us the gift of sobriety. And so that really is what we're here tonight about. We're celebrating this. And this is a marvelous thing. But there's a second purpose to every AA meeting. And that is to remember what we are. You know, God has built into each and every one of us a forgetter. And it is the goodness and the kindness and the love of God that on a moment's notice, you and I cannot recall all the tragedies of our lives. The death of a parent, of a spouse, of a child. Very, very unhappy memories that were very painful. We can't recall them. With the passage of time, they become dimmer and dimmer, and the pain becomes less and less. I've met many people who have said to me, I'll never get over this. I'll never get over it. But they will, and they do. We will, and we do. And this is a marvelous gift, I believe. Except for those of us who are alcoholics. We have to do everything possible to keep alive the reality of our drinking. That's why we go to meetings. And that's why when people don't go to meetings, they get drunk. Because they forget the pain. The pain. You see, left to my own devices, my drinking could become a Manhattan on Christmas Eve in community. Nothing wrong with that. But that's not the reality of my drinking. The reality of my drinking is coming up New Hampshire Avenue on all fours. I've already lost the automobile. I can't even stand up. A taxi driver makes a U-turn, and he picks me up, and he takes me home. I always like to add, he was a little bit surprised at where I lived, you know. I kept trying to get him to drop me off at this corner or that corner. I didn't want him to bring me to the seminary. So I think he was very surprised when he found out where I lived. That's the reality of my drinking, and that's why I go to meetings, and that's why I share, in order to keep that reality alive. And that's what I want to do tonight. That's why I'm here tonight, to share with you my experience, my strength, and my hope. I think it's the greatest waste of time for us to try and figure out why we drank. You know, when I went into treatment, that was the first question I asked my sponsor. John, I said, why do you suppose I drank? He said, I'm going to tell you why you drank. He said, you drank because your mother wore army shoes in the kitchen. Now he said that you know why you drank. He said, do you think you can drink again? I said, no. He said, good, you got the message. See? I am what a priest friend of mine calls a late bloomer and an early fader. I was more than 40 years old when I picked up that drink, had been in religion 17 years. As I said, I don't think it's of any consequence to try and figure out why. It is sufficient, I believe, to accept the fact that all of us drank or took drugs, whoever we did, for the same reason. To change the way we feel. To change the way we feel. When we feel bad, to feel good. And when we feel good, to feel great. And when we feel great, to feel like we're on the moon, huh? That's why we drank. That's why we took drugs. To change the way we feel. But for those of you who might identify with me, I sometimes think that I was born with glasses, you know. I remember my mother giving me a pat on the tush and saying, go out and play, but don't break your glasses. Don't break your glasses. When I was growing up, I never felt part of the group. I hated sports. The guys I ran with loved sports. They used to make teams, you know, 5 and 5, and I would be number 6. You don't count, you know. Can you imagine what this is doing to my ego? But I'm saying to myself, I'm going to be better than you are. I'm going to be smarter than you are. I'm going to be something. I think that's alcoholic thinking. God as I understand him. God as he was presented to me first by my parents. God as I found him myself through prayer and meditation. God as he was presented to me by my church was always a very personal, very loving God. I have always had a relationship with God. From my perspective, it was not always good. Not always good, but I always had this living relationship with God. And when I was growing up, being a Catholic, I felt the call, the urge to come closer to God through priesthood or religious life. But World War II came along, and I put that on the back burner, and instead I went into the service. And I spent almost 6 years, 5 years, 9 months, 10 days in the service. Booze was no problem to me, no problem at all. I left the service for the sole purpose of entering my religious community. Left the service in December and entered my community the first week in February. Now, for the next 17 years, I scrupulously, faithfully, conscientiously lived the religious life. And the consequences of that was that I was a good and decent man. Now, that may sound like pride. It's not. Humility does not consist in denying what we are, but rather in attributing to God, the source of all good, that which is good in us. For us to deny our sobriety tonight would be ridiculous. To take credit for it would be more ridiculous. And so I grew into a good and a very decent man. Looking back on it now, I see certain patterns in my life. My parents took care of me until I was 18. The United States Navy took care of me until I was about 23. And now my religious community took care of me. Religious life at that time was very, very structured. We all wore the same clothes, you know. We got up at the same time. We went to bed at the same time. We ate at the same time. We did everything the same. And there was always someone in charge. Always someone in charge. I had a job in my religious community. It was in the treasurer's office. But the ultimate responsibility was not mine. It was always someone else's. When Vatican II came along and the changes took place in the Catholic Church, one of the consequences of that was that I could now hold office in my community that before I couldn't. When I tell you what it was, you'll know where I got the money to drink. They made me the Treasurer General of the whole outfit. You know, I lived with men who, for the love of God, loved me, and I loved them for the same reason. They would never knowingly or deliberately cause me any hurt or any concern. They were good and very decent men. And I loved them for the same reason. When I took that job as treasurer, feelings that I had not experienced in years came back. Fear. I was afraid to make a mistake. I was afraid to be wrong. And so I began to try to look wise. You ever try to look wise? That's a challenge, you know. I developed a philosophy, or I adopted a philosophy. Keep your mouth shut, and people will think you're stupid. Open it, and they'll know you're stupid. So I said very little. I nodded a lot. I thought that made you look wise. Stroked my chin a lot. Didn't have a beard at the time. Would have grown the beard if I thought it would help, you know. But stroked my chin a lot. And no matter what they said, I said, let us reflect upon this. To act in haste is to repent in leisure. See? And they thought they had a guru. Now, I must add that in this time, in these years that I was in religion, I developed a deep personal relationship with God. It's important that you understand that, otherwise what happened to me will lose its significance. You love your wife, your husband, your children. My love for God was not unlike that. God was the center, the sun and center of everything in my life. The sun and center of everything in my life. But I was at this point paralyzed. I was afraid to do anything. Then one night, I went out with some business associates, and they ordered Manhattans, and I had a Manhattan. I wanted to be just as sophisticated as they. When the waitress said, what do you have? I said, I'll have the same as he'll have. And he was having a Manhattan. I took that drink, and I felt warm all over, right out to the tips of my fingers, right down to my toes. And you know what I knew? I knew that everybody loved Alexis, and Alexis loves everybody, and everything is going to be okay. My immediate reaction was, where have you been hiding this stuff all my life? This is the answer to all my prayers. This is the answer to all my problems. It wasn't a very short time to become my greatest problem. My whole drinking career only lasted 7 years. I took the accelerated course, if you will. But you know, booze loosed my tongue, made me feel free. When I took that drink, I felt like saying, ask me something. Ask me anything. Let me share with you all that is in here, you know. You don't have to limit it to finances. Ask me something about philosophy or theology, whatever you want. But let me tell you, see. I thought I had found the freedom that I was to find much later in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The big book of AA says that booze is cunning and it's baffling and it's powerful. And to that I say amen. Booze did not kick me in the teeth the first time, not the first 10 times. It allowed me to believe that I was using the booze, when in fact the booze was getting a tighter and tighter grip on me. As I say, the big book tells us it's cunning, and it's baffling, and it's powerful, and it's progressive. And the progression sometimes can't be seen. Can't be seen. The primary symptom of the disease of alcoholism is denial, coupled with the greatest dishonesty that you can imagine. If you're going to maintain that denial, you have to be dishonest. You absolutely have to be dishonest. And I became extremely dishonest. My relationship with God, that wonderful relationship I had with God, began to deteriorate. Because I was drinking? No. Because I'm busy now about many things in my Father's house. I just don't have time to pray. I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time for all the things that I was doing before. And again, as I say, booze was giving me this freedom. You know, some people say when they came to the program of AA, one of the things that impressed them most was that first word in the first step, we. We. That didn't impress me at all. Didn't impress me at all. Because I had had an experience with that word we before that. The music has kind of distracted me a little bit, so I'm going to move back. I became extremely dishonest, deceived myself into believing, as I say, that I was still in control. You know, the first time one of my friends, one of these men I lived with, said to me, Alexis, don't you think you drink too much? Instant hate. Instant hate. Became angry, resentful. I made a mental list. Actually, I made two lists. Those in front of whom I could drink, and those in front of whom I could not drink. And in a very short time, I only had one list, because everybody was on my case. I remember one time, one of the fellows that I lived with asked me, he said, "What do you got in that glass?" And I said, "Bourbon and ginger ale." He said, "Oh my, it can't be much ginger ale." He said, "It's brown." So I brought a green glass. Always used a green glass after that. More and more people began to talk about my drinking. And so I got angry. You know, self-righteous. How dare you get on my case when all the wonderful things that I'm doing for this community? And so I said, if that's your attitude, I won't drink at home anymore. Now, I was experiencing a lot of problems up to this point. You know, that sickness, throwing up, headaches, what I come to call on-the-job absenteeism. You know, I'd get to the office and pass out, but I was there. See? All these terrible things were happening to me, but that was nothing compared to what was about to happen to me. I began to go outside of my religious house to drink. I lost automobiles and I dented automobiles. I was forever going to the police station, getting my car back, always saying that it was stolen. You know? We're not allowed to own our own automobiles. We have 30 guys in the house, and you have to sign up for the car. I'd come to breakfast, and someone would say, "Who parked the car out in the field?" I'd go and I'd tear that page out of the book. Someone would say, "There's a big hole in the blue car," and someone knocked down the stop sign. I'd go tear that page out of the book again. You know, I tell you these things now, and there's a certain humor to it. But let me tell you that when I was going through it, it was the most painful experience of my life. The most painful experience of my life. I was filled with self-hate. Filled with self-hate. I can remember terrible things happening to me. Insane things. I shouldn't have had any trouble with that second step at all, but I did. I did. But insane things were happening to me. On one occasion, at the Holiday Inn on US 1 outside of Laurel, I smoked KW after having downed about a fifth, and I thought I had a stroke. I couldn't move. I was sitting in the lobby in this chair, absolutely stoned. And up here was like scrambled eggs. I couldn't put two thoughts together. The only thing that kept coming back to me was, what am I going to say when they get here? What am I going to say when they get here? Someone's going to get here. What am I going to say? Insane things, insane things. Another time, a guy had a gun. It was a Saturday night special, and he left it in the glove compartment of my car. Can you imagine? I'm sitting up on New Hampshire Avenue about 3 o'clock in the morning, cleaning my fingerprints off of this gun. The thought occurred to me, just throw it away. I thought, no, better not. Some kid is going to pick it up and blow him or herself away. So then I thought, no, I'll put it in the mailbox. That's what I'll do. The mailman will find it. When I saw how high the mailbox was, I ain't going to drop that in there. It's going to go off and blow me away. So I put it under the mailbox and I called the police. I'll always remember, he said to me, "I don't suppose you want to give me your name." I said, "No, I don't suppose I do." Insane things are happening to me. As I say, the guilt and the remorse was absolutely overwhelming. Now you must ask yourself, didn't you do something about this? Of course I did. I did what every alcoholic who's worth his salt does. The first thing I tried was willpower. Of course, that didn't work, huh? The second thing I tried was controlled drinking. Hell, by Monday, I was into Friday's drinks. The next thing I tried was the medical doctor. You know? I never even told him the truth, but I told him enough that he prescribed Antabuse. I took the Antabuse. But as I told you, one of the primary symptoms of the disease of alcoholism is dishonesty, maintaining that denial. And so I realized after about 2 days that Antabuse gave me indigestion, kept me awake at night, gave me the itch, you know. So I stopped taking it. Of course, I got drunk. And then I got frightened, and I began taking the Antabuse again, and then I drank on the Antabuse. Now, let me tell you, since getting sober, I have had a heart attack. When I compare the pain of a heart attack with the pain that I experienced from the drinking on the interviews, I'll take the heart attack any day. The church. God knows I have taken more pledges than Bayer has aspirin. That's part of the insanity of this disease. You keep doing the same thing and expect different results. You know, by about the fourth time, I should have said to myself, I'd go up on the roof and step off, and this time go up. See? Just as logical. Kept taking the pledges, and kept getting another layer of guilt about it. Finally, despite all of this, I thought I was a pretty cool cat. I thought I had it all together. And so it was at great sacrifice that I went to see a psychiatrist. And that's the part about the we. I was not at all impressed by AA's we, because when I got to see the psychiatrist, what he said to me was, we are about to start upon a new way of life. And I thought, damn, that's pretty good. I'm not going to have to do it alone. But he said, you are a little nervous. And so I'm going to give you something to calm you down, and then we're going to talk. Well, in about 10 minutes, that new way of life arrived. And I thought, damn, I can live with this. I felt so good about this that I had a couple of drinks on the way home to celebrate. I was having blackouts before that would last 4 or 6 hours, you know. Now they would last 2 days. Did you ever come to in a hallway, you know, all that traffic going? You don't say, where am I? We never say that. You just flow with the stream. You get a hold of a newspaper or a TV set. Find out where am I and what happened. Nothing that I am saying here this evening, nothing, is intended to ridicule the medical profession, psychiatry, certainly not the church. I got a vested interest in the church, eh? Anyone who knows anything about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous knows we would not be where we are tonight were it not for knowledgeable clergy, knowledgeable medical doctors, knowledgeable psychiatrists. I just seem to have the unique ability to pick out the biggest clown in town. See? That's what I did. But you know what I found out? You see, all this time I was praying. What I found out was that I was doing it half right. I was bringing to God my problem, but I was also bringing him the solution. And God was saying no. But see, I didn't think that God was saying no. I thought God wasn't even listening to me. By this time, I'm so convinced that God is angry with me and disgusted with me. You know, there's just no purpose in going on. No purpose in going on. Now, I know some theology. Yeah? I know that God has changed us. God ever loved me, he's always loved me. That's one of the things that's difficult for me tonight, to fully appreciate the fact that God doesn't love me anymore tonight as I stand here talking to you sober than he did when I laid around in my room and I threw up all over myself. Didn't know whether it was day or night. God has always loved me. But at this time in my life, I thought God is really, really angry with me. He won't even talk to me. And so go back again to what I said to you earlier. That relationship I developed with God, that intimate personal relationship with God. And I share with you that on February the 14th, 1973, I knowingly and deliberately attempted suicide. God be damned. God can go to hell. Or God will understand. I don't know. But that is what my alcoholism brought me to. I came to in Holy Cross Hospital, again, solely and exclusively by the grace of God. A priest friend of mine who had been away came home that night, came to my room, and found me, brought me to the hospital with the help of others. You know, the only thing that happened there was I found out that you can't scare an alcoholic. When I left that institution, I knew I would never drink again. It's finished. Never again. Never again. 4 days later, I was back in the bag. Holy Cross Hospital didn't have an alcoholic treatment facility. All they did was give me back my health, and they did a good job of that. But they did nothing about the spiritual or the mental part of this sickness. And I was doomed to drink again. And my drinking went on. That was in February. My drinking went on until that November, when I fought off Montgomery County and Prince George County emergency squads at Chrisfield's restaurant on Georgia Avenue, if anybody knows where that is. Fought them tooth and nail. And the next day, when I realized that now the cat was out of the bag, everyone knew about my problem, I called a priest friend of mine, Father John. I always give his full name. He says to me, I ain't got no anonymity. Father John Baptist Dillon McCarthy, who was the Associate Director of an alcoholic treatment facility in Cleveland, Rosary Hall at St. Vincent's Hospital. And in the face of this fantastic track record, the best I could say was, John, I think I may be having a problem with drinking. And so John came out to see me. And he tells me, because I don't remember too much of it, he tells me that we did agree that I had a problem with drinking. I remember the next day he said to me, well, I'll see you in Cleveland. I said, why? What's going on in Cleveland? He said, well, last night you said you'd come. I said, oh, fine. You never wanted to meet. You don't remember. I'll be there. I'll be there. The next day I went out to Cleveland, Ohio, filled with denial, filled with resentment and anger, all of the symptoms of the disease of alcoholism, and I had them in spades, let me tell you. And when I was going out there, a priest friend of mine, a classmate of mine, was taking me. And I just said to myself, if I'm going to be miserable, damn it, so are you. Everyone's going to be miserable. And I shamed that man from BWI Airport to Hopkins Airport in Cleveland. Loud and boisterous and vulgar, I was absolutely miserable. And I went into this treatment facility. I was so bombed when I got there, they didn't even bother to take the vital statistics. They put me right in the bed. One of the things they asked said, how tall are you? I said, 6'4". And then passed out. Next day, people kept coming into the room, walking around and walking out again. Finally, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this nurse comes in and she said, are you Mr. Norton? And I said, yeah. She said, we've been looking for you all day. You're supposed to be 6'4". I found out in that institution in a very short time, there were 2 things you had to do if you wanted to get out of there. One was look repentant. And by damn, I was good at that. And the other one was say you're an alcoholic. Because that's what the people were saying, and they were all going home. But we alkies are cunning. You don't want to do that the first day, they won't believe it. So I waited 2 days. And I danced into Father John and I said, John, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he laughed, which I thought was very insulting, but anyhow, he laughed. He said, hell, he said, I can teach a parrot to say that. See? And he'll believe it more than you do. Then again came the anger, I said to him, John, you're talking about restoring me to sanity. I'm not insane. Oh, he said, wait a minute now. He said, that is not a medical term. If that were a medical term, he said, we would have you locked up. Now, I don't know what he thought I was. They had taken all your clothes away from you. They give you a pair of pajamas. One size fits nobody. It's got the name of the institution written right across the back of it, see? A little pair of slippers. Now, where the hell are you going to go dressed like that in Cleveland in November? See? He didn't have to lock the doors. No, he said, it's a legal term. It means a lack of good judgment. He said, why don't you go back to your room and think about what you've been doing for the past couple of years, months. He said, and you might have some doubt, that what you're doing is very sound. So there was one for John. Then some layman in the hospital. I resented it when laymen preached to me, And this guy said to me, your problem is you haven't turned your will and your life over to the care of God. And I let loose with another litany of obscenities at him. The gist of which was, you are mistaken, sir. I have given God my body through celibacy, my fortune, whatever it might have been, through poverty, and my will through obedience. He didn't buy it. And the more I discussed it, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was true. I had not turned my will and my life over to the care of God. I had not abandoned myself to God. I had not surrendered to God. Up to this point, things were going pretty good. So, you know, like the couple who had the child who never spoke, never said a word. The kid was 14 years old, had him examined by every doctor in town. They couldn't find anything clinically wrong or physically wrong with the child, but he never spoke. Finally, one day, he said, "The toast is burned." And the mother said, "My God, you can speak." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Why didn't you speak before now?" He said, "Up until now, everything's been okay." So to a certain degree, in my relationship with God, everything had been okay up to now, see? Now you're asking me to do impossible things. You want me to go to AA. My God, who goes to AA unless you got on 2 overcoats, your underwear in your pocket, your sneakers around your neck? No, this is not for me. I'm too intelligent. I don't need this. You know, I certainly don't need this. And again, the anger and the resentment and the denial was very, very strong. One of the great mysteries, as far as I am concerned, is that God chooses to work through people. You and I can be instruments in the hands of God to bring about the healing of other alcoholics. I owe a tremendous debt, one I shall never be able to pay, a tremendous debt to Al-Anon. I was so filled with anger and resentment and denial that the people who came from AA, I just dismissed. I just didn't even hear them, for that matter. A woman came from Al-Anon. A lovely lady. She was married to one of us. I always like to add, not a brother, you know, an alkie. And he was no winner. But she was not in the least bit judgmental or angry, nothing at all. What she said would probably mean nothing to you, but it changed my whole life. What she said was, "It is a beautiful and a courageous thing that you are doing, trying to stop drinking." And I knew that what I was doing was neither beautiful nor courageous. It was a con job, a real con job. And I decided I will listen. I'll listen. And as a result of that, I was able to accept the program. Not as I accept it today, no, not as I accept it today, but I was able to accept the program. I thought the greatest heresy that I heard in that institution was when they read from the big book, "We believe a man is unthinking who says sobriety is enough." I said, hell, that's enough for me. If I can just stop drinking, that's all I want. That's all I want. But the 12 and 12 says that AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and can enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. It's that second part that many of us miss. And so I began, as I say, to listen. And I accepted the program. And Father John said to me, "I give you 3 things to do if you never want to come back to this institution again. Don't take that first drink. Go to AA and pray." And he said, "Do it in that order. Don't screw it up. Don't start drinking, praying, and going to AA." And he also said, you know, in Denny's restaurant, you can go in there and they give you peas, meatloaf, and mashed potatoes for $1.50. But it says no substitutions. And so he said, in what I am giving you to do, no substitution. You do not substitute church for AA. Now that is not to say you don't go to church. Again, chapter 2 of the big book says the majority of us believe in membership in an organized church. But he said, you don't substitute that. Well, I was yesing John to death because I just wanted to get out of there. You know? And in my mind, I said, yeah, that's not unreasonable. I'm going to go to a meeting. Hell, I might go to a meeting every week in Virginia because I live in Maryland, and I'm not about to let anybody see me go to the meetings. I remember he said to me, "Alexis, you going to be okay?" I said, "John, I'm going to put up the fight of my life." He said, "Fight hell, the war's over. You're lost. Surrender, surrender." I got on the plane in Cleveland to come back to Washington. But even before that, my reconciliation with God, as I understand him, was instantaneous and was total. As soon as I got my head a little bit cleared, it took place in that hospital, Rosary Hall in Cleveland. I again found the unconditional love of God The total and complete reconciliation. God saying, our brother who was dead has come back to life. Put a ring on his finger and a robe on him. I was totally and completely, as I say, reconciled to God. I became a little complacent. Even in the short time that I was in that institution, I thought, I can handle this. I can handle this. So I'm going to go to that meeting every week in Virginia. I got on the plane. We weren't on the plane 10 minutes when this real cute number, you know, in a mini skirt and a push cart came down the aisle. Here I go again, see? But I didn't take that drink. I didn't take that drink. And when the plane landed, I went to a meeting next door to where I live. You know? Typical alcoholic. Went all the way to Cleveland to find out I should have gone next door. I've been going to meetings every night almost since then. My commitment to AA has grown, I am, I assure you tonight, not only glad and grateful to God that I'm a recovering alcoholic. My brothers and sisters, I am glad and I am grateful to God that I'm an alcoholic. If I were not an alcoholic, I would never have found this program. There would not be in my life tonight the dimensions that are there, that were never there before, could never have been there, were it not for the desperation that alcoholism creates in us. My relationship with God, as I understand Him, is better than it ever was. My relationship with the people of God has been completely changed. But most important of all, my relationship with Alexis is different. I personally believe that the spiritual awakening that is spoken of in the 12th step occurs in our lives when two conditions simultaneously exist. When one, we come to believe and totally and to live our lives in the knowledge that God is involved in every single area of our lives. And when we can come to accept and to believe that we are something wonderful, something marvelous, something great. For me, AA is not unlike the story of the Wizard of Oz. You know, the Tin Man wanted a heart, and the lion wanted courage, and the straw man wanted a brain. And they went to the wizard in pursuit of these things. Did the wizard give it to them? The answer is no. He merely gave them an assignment, if you will, the performance of which revealed to them that they had these gifts. They already had these gifts. They must just now use them. That is what AA has done for me, has made me conscious of the gifts that God has given to me. And that's what enables me to say to you that I'm not only glad and grateful to God that I'm a recovering alcoholic, glad and grateful to God that I'm an alcoholic. This has been the most marvelous experience of my life. I've experienced love like I never knew before through this fellowship. You know, when I left the hospital, Father John said to me, Alexis, he said, every night when you go to bed, he said, you must thank God for your day of sobriety and ask Him to keep you sober again the next day. And I did that, but after about a week, I expanded on it. I began then to pray for all those who are in AA, and Al-Anon, and Alateen, and every night I pray for our brothers and sisters who are still out there suffering the torments of the disease of alcoholism. So the way I figure it, you owe me one. Tonight, when you speak to God as you understand Him, say a prayer for little old Alexis. God bless you. I love you all. Thank you.